The first contraction hit as the elevator doors opened, and there he was, her husband, standing with another woman, his mistress. On the day of their divorce hearing, Eleanor Whitmore was 7.5 months pregnant, alone, betrayed, walking into a courtroom that held the last 4 years of her life. But in her bag was a sealed manila envelope, a flash drive, and one printed email her husband did not know she had seen. The mistress wore cream that morning, the color a bride wears. She smiled, like a woman who had already won. She had no idea what was coming. In the next 40 minutes, 3 lives would be destroyed. 1 marriage would end, $1 billion empire would crack. And a woman the world had underestimated for 4 years was about to discover something she had forgotten, that she had never needed saving. She just needed to stop apologizing. Stay with me. Lesson statement. This story is about a truth every woman eventually learns. Love is not a trap. Love is a door. And a door that will not open when you need it to is not love at all. It is just a wall with better marketing. The bravest thing a woman ever does is not leaving. It is deciding to leave. Because once that door is open, no one can close it again. Before Eleanor walks into that courtroom, take 1 second to help another woman find this story tonight. If you have ever felt invisible in your own home, if you have ever ignored the quiet voice that told you something was wrong, if you have ever wondered whether you were strong enough to start over, tap that like button. Leave a short comment, even just one word, here. So I know you are with her. Share this story with a friend who needs to hear it. And if this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about women who walk through the unlocked door. Now let me take you back to that courthouse elevator. Minute 1. Contraction 1. The moment everything changed. The first contraction hit as the elevator doors opened. Eleanor Whitmore pressed her palm flat against the cold marble wall of the courthouse lobby and counted. 1, 2, 3. The tightness eased. Braxton Hicks. Just Braxton Hicks. That was what the nurse at Westchester Memorial had told her yesterday. That was what she would keep telling herself today. She adjusted the strap of her leather tote. It was heavier than usual. Heavier by exactly 1 sealed manila envelope, 1 flash drive, and 1 printed copy of an email Bennett did not know she had seen. Ellie! Maggie Donnelly appeared at her elbow, red hair pulled back tight, reading glasses pushed up into her hairline, briefcase in one hand, coffee in the other. 30 seconds, sweetheart, Maggie said. You ready? No. Good, Maggie said. Liars say yes. You are not a liar. Ellie almost laughed. Almost. The doors to courtroom 3 stood open at the end of the hall. She could hear voices from inside. One voice in particular. Deep, smooth. The voice that had proposed to her on a beach in Nantucket 4 years ago. The voice that had whispered forever into her hair while her mother cried happy tears at the rehearsal dinner. The voice that had also, according to the flash drive in her bag, told a woman named Sloane Hargrove that his marriage to Ellie was a formality. Ellie placed her hand on her belly. The baby kicked. Okay, she said. Let's go. She walked slowly because she was 7.5 months pregnant and because slowness was the only dignity she had left today. The heels of her flats clicked against the marble. Click, click, click. And then she saw them. Bennett Ashford Calloway III stood at the far end of the corridor. Charcoal suit, freshly cut hair. His cufflinks, she noticed with a lurch, were the platinum knots she had given him for their 2nd anniversary. The ones engraved with EWC on the inside. He was still wearing them. Today, at their divorce hearing. Sloane Hargrove stood next to him, not behind him, next to him, close enough that their sleeves touched. She wore cream, ivory cream, the color a bride wore. Her dark hair was pulled into the same low chignon she had worn at Ellie's wedding. The wedding, where she had stood at the altar as Ellie's maid of honor and read a toast about two souls finding each other in a crowded world. Ellie's vision tunneled. "Breathe," Maggie said, quietly beside her. "In, out. We do not react. Not here." Bennett's eyes found her. For 1 second, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. With Bennett, it had always been hard to tell. Then his mouth tightened, and the flicker was gone. "Eleanor," he said, one syllable, like they were strangers at a gala. "Bennett," she replied. Sloane did not nod. Sloane smiled, a small, private, victorious smile. The kind of smile a woman gave when she had won. And that smile, more than anything else in the last 11 weeks, was the thing that finally made something inside Ellie go still and quiet and cold. She looked at Sloane directly, for the first time in 71 days. "You wore cream," Ellie said softly. Sloane's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "You wore cream. To a divorce hearing." Ellie tilted her head. "That is interesting." Before Sloane could answer, Ellie walked past them and into the courtroom. Maggie whispered under her breath, "That is my girl." The door closed behind them. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and copy machine toner. Judge Rowan McAllister was not yet on the bench. The court reporter, Dorothy Finch, tapped at her stenotype, testing keys. Ellie lowered herself carefully into the chair Maggie pulled out for her. The baby kicked again. Harder. "It is okay," Ellie thought. "We are okay." Mama brought the folder. She reached down, touched the hospital bracelet still on her wrist from yesterday. 3 times. Touched her belly. 3 times. A small ritual, a small spell. Across the aisle, Bennett sat down at the respondent's table. Sloane did not sit with him. She sat in the gallery behind him, in the first row, and crossed her legs. Ellie watched her in her peripheral vision. Graham Whitfield, Bennett's attorney, murmured something. Bennett laughed, quietly, just a breath of it. And in that breath, Ellie heard the entire last 4 years of her life. "Maggie," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," Maggie replied. "Is it okay if I do not cry today?" Maggie did not look at her. She kept her eyes on the papers. But she reached sideways and squeezed Ellie's wrist. Hard, once. "Eleanor Whitmore," Maggie said. "You do whatever the hell you want today." "All rise," said the bailiff. Ellie stood. Her back ached. Her feet were swollen. There was a manila envelope on the table in front of her that was going to destroy 3 lives in the next 40 minutes. One of those lives was going to be her own. She was ready. "I am not crazy," she told herself. "I know what I saw." And for the first time in 11 weeks, her hands were steady. The pregnancy test had fallen from her shaking hands onto the cold tile of the guest bathroom floor. Not the master bathroom, the guest bathroom. Because even then, some part of Ellie had known she wanted to tell Bennett in a specific way, in a specific place, 3 lines, 2 for the test, 1 on her own reflection where her forehead had pressed against the mirror. She had been trying for 2 years. 2 years of ovulation strips and basal thermometers. 2 years of clinic visits and 1 failed round of IVF. 2 years of Bennett coming home later and later and saying, "Ellie, love, maybe we should stop. Maybe this is not meant for us." 2 years of her mother saying, "Honey, a baby is a gift, not a project." And now, 3 lines. She had wrapped the test in tissue paper. She had put it in a small silver box. She had written a card that said, "You are going to be someone's father." She had tied the card with a blue ribbon, then a pink one, then a white one, Then she had gone downstairs. Bennett was not in the garden. "Mr. Calloway left about an hour ago, ma'am," Harriet Coyle said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Dinner with investors. He said to tell you not to wait up." "He did?" Ellie asked. "He sent a text to the house line," Harriet said. "Would you like me to heat the salmon?" "No," Ellie said. "No, thank you, Harriet." Ellie had carried the silver box upstairs. She had placed it on Bennett's nightstand. She had sat on the edge of the bed and waited. 8 o'clock, 9, 10, 11. The baby, who was not yet a baby, who was just a cluster of cells the size of a blueberry, held its first vigil in the dark with her. At 11:45, she heard the garage door. At 11:50, she heard Bennett come up the stairs, humming. She had not heard him hum in months. "Ellie," he said, stepping into the bedroom, tugging at his tie, "you are awake. I thought you would be asleep." He smelled like bourbon, and underneath that, something else, something floral, something that was not hers. "I wanted to wait up," she said. "Sweet girl," he said. Distantly, he kissed the top of her head. "I am beat. Let me shower." "Bennett." "Hmm?" "There is a box on your nightstand." He looked. He frowned. He picked it up. He opened it. He stared at the test for what felt like a very long time. And then he said the thing that Ellie would replay in her head for the next 11 weeks, the thing she would play back to herself in the car, in the shower, at 3 in the morning, over a bowl of ice cream she could not taste. He said, "Are you sure?" Not, "Oh my God." Not, "We did it." Not, "I love you." Just, "Are you sure?" "I took 3 tests," she said. "I have a blood draw scheduled Thursday." "Right." He set the box back down, very carefully, the way you set down something fragile you did not want. "Right, of course. That is, Ellie, that is wonderful." He hugged her. The hug was hollow. Ellie knew. The way a wife knows. The way a woman knows. Something had just happened in her husband's chest that was not joy. He went into the bathroom and showered for 45 minutes. While the shower ran, Ellie picked up his suit jacket off the chair where he had thrown it. She did not mean to. Her hand simply moved. In the inside breast pocket, she found a cream-colored envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note on heavy stationery. "B. Next Thursday. The Pierre. Room as usual. I have news, too. Yours." S. Ellie stood in her own bedroom, 7 weeks pregnant, holding a love note from her husband's mistress. And she felt her life split cleanly down the middle. She put the note back in the jacket. She walked downstairs. She made herself a mug of decaf chamomile tea. She sat at the kitchen island and drank it slowly, her free hand resting on her stomach. And she thought, okay, think. That was the first night. The second night, she started a folder. The third night, she bought a second phone at a Verizon store 2 towns over. Cash. No name on the account. Just a burner. She texted the number to one person only, her college roommate Lucy, now a corporate investigator in Boston. The text said, "I think I need help." Quietly. Lucy texted back in 4 minutes. "I am calling you now. Go somewhere private." Ellie went into the laundry room, closed the door, sat on the floor with her back against the dryer. "Ellie," Lucy said, "talk to me." Ellie talked. For 45 minutes, she talked about the note, about the floral smell, about the "are you sure?" About the 2 years of maybe this is not meant for us, about the way Sloane had texted her 3 times that week asking if everything was okay. Lucy listened. When Ellie finally stopped, Lucy said one sentence. "Sweetheart," Lucy said, "you need a war room. Not a therapist. A war room. I do not know how to build one. You do not have to know, Lucy said. I do. Here's what we are going to do. By the 11th week, the folder had become a banker's box. Ellie sat at the kitchen island in the dark most nights now, while Bennett slept upstairs. She folded and refolded the hospital discharge blanket she had bought for the nursery. Folded it, smoothed it flat, 3 times, refolded it. 3 times. Somewhere along the way, she thought, I became invisible. It was not a question, it was a statement. And statements, she was learning, were how women found their way back. The thing about Sloane Hargrove was that she had been there for everything. She had been there when Ellie got into the court old for her master's in art history. She had been there, drunk on cheap wine in Ellie's studio apartment, crying happy tears and saying you are going to change the art world. Ellie Whitmore. She had been there the night Ellie met Bennett at the Whitney Gala, had in fact been the one to point him out, had whispered in Ellie's ear, the tall one in gray, go talk to him. I dare you. She had been Ellie's maid of honor. She had given a toast at the rehearsal dinner about 2 souls finding each other in a crowded world. She had cried. Everyone had cried. Bennett's mother, Vivian, had leaned over and murmured to Ellie, what a lovely friend you have. Sloane had also, it turned out, already been sleeping with Bennett for 6 months by the time of that toast. Ellie learned that detail in week 8 from a private investigator named Russell Holloway, whom Maggie Donnelly had recommended. He sat across from her in a diner in White Plains, sliding photographs across the Formica table, one at a time. Bennett and Sloane at a restaurant in Tribeca. Bennett and Sloane walking into a hotel. Bennett and Sloane at a charity auction where Ellie had been home with the flu. I am sorry, Russ said. I hate this part. How long? Ellie asked. Total. How long? Russ flipped to the last page of his report. Based on the financial trail, ma'am, he said. Best I can tell. 5 years. Ellie did the math very slowly. 5 years meant before the wedding. 5 years meant Sloane had written that toast knowing. 5 years meant every time Sloane had held Ellie's hand during the IVF appointments. Every time Sloane had said, he loves you so much, Ellie. I have never seen a man so devoted. Every time Sloane had let Ellie cry into her shoulder about why the baby would not come, about why her body was betraying her. 5 years. Ellie went to the bathroom of the diner and was quietly, efficiently sick. Then she washed her hands, lock, unlock, the door. Then she came back out. Russ, she said, I need everything. Financials, texts, property, everything. Mrs. Calloway, that kind of workup, that is months, and it is expensive. I have my own money, Ellie said. From before him, I never put it in the joint account. Get me everything. Russ raised his eyebrows. Smart girl. No, Ellie said. Scared girl. There is a difference. Russ studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Calloway, he said quietly, I have been doing this for 26 years. I will tell you what I tell all my clients. You are going to have good days and bad days from here forward. On the bad days, remember this conversation. Remember that you walked into this diner with a wedding ring on your finger and walked out with a plan. That took a kind of strength most women never find. Most women stay. You are not staying. Ellie sat very still. Then she said, Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Russ said. Thank me when you hold your baby and your bank account on the same day. She drove home from that diner at 3:30 in the afternoon. She did not go home. She drove to the overlook where Bennett had proposed. Nantucket was on the other side of the country, but there was an overlook in Pound Ridge that looked like it. He had taken her there once, pretended it was romantic. It had not been. Bennett did not do romance. He did gestures that looked like romance in photographs. Ellie sat in the parked Range Rover, hand on the door handle, unable to open it. She thought about getting out. She thought about walking to the edge of the overlook. She thought about screaming. She did not do any of these things. She sat in the car for 40 minutes. Then she drove home. Harriet was in the kitchen. "Mrs. Calloway," Harriet said, "you look pale. Sit down. I will make tea." "Harriet," Ellie said, "how long have you worked for the Calloways?" 31 years, ma'am." "You worked for Bennett's parents before him." "I did. I came with the family." "Harriet," Ellie said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you answer, I will not tell anyone." Harriet set down the kettle. She looked at Ellie for a very long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Calloway, I have been waiting for you to ask me something. For 3 years, I have been waiting. Ask." Ellie's throat closed. "Did you know?" she said. "About Sloane?" "Yes," Harriet said. The word landed like a stone in water. "How long have you known?" Ellie asked. "Since before the wedding," Harriet said. "Mrs. Calloway, Ellie, I am going to tell you something I have never told anyone. Vivian knew too. Preston did not. But Vivian did. She chose not to stop it because she did not approve of you. She thought you were not worthy of the Calloway name. She thought a woman like Sloane would be easier to manage." Ellie sank down into a kitchen chair. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because you are pregnant," Harriet said simply, "and I have held my tongue for 31 years in this house, but I will not hold it while a child is coming." Harriet came around the counter. She sat down across from Ellie. She took Ellie's hands in her own. "Ellie," Harriet said, "I have 4 children of my own, 3 grandchildren. My oldest granddaughter is 11. I have watched her grow up, watching Mrs. Vivian treat her housekeepers like furniture. I made a decision a long time ago that when the moment came to choose between the Calloways and a pregnant woman, I would choose the pregnant woman. Harriet, I am telling you, leave. Take whatever you can. Leave." "I am going to," Ellie said. Her voice cracked. "But Harriet, I need help. I need someone inside this house to help me." Harriet did not hesitate. "Tell me what you need." And over the next 6 weeks, Harriet Coyle, housekeeper of 31 years to the Calloway family, quietly, carefully, without ever touching a single document herself, made sure Russell Holloway's private investigator team knew exactly where Bennett's study keys were hidden, exactly what times the housekeeping staff rotated, and exactly which drawer in the mahogany desk contained the second unofficial set of ledgers. This, Ellie would realize later, was the moment she began to win. Not in court, in her own kitchen, with a woman who had held her tongue for 31 years and finally decided to speak. By week 10, the banker's box had become 3 banker's boxes. Ellie kept them in the guest room closet. Behind the luggage, under a folded wool blanket, Bennett had not set foot in the guest room in 18 months. It was the safest place in the house. Inside those boxes were 4 years of emails between Bennett and Sloane, recovered from a cloud backup Bennett had forgotten he enabled. 6 months of text messages, extracted by a forensics firm in Queens that Russ had recommended. Bank records from 3 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, all in Bennett's name, all opened within 6 weeks of Ellie's first positive pregnancy test. 47 hotel receipts from the Pierre in Manhattan, spanning 4 years. Property records for a 3-bedroom apartment in the West Village, deeded to Sloane Hargrove by Bennett Calloway, dated 18 months before Ellie's first IVF cycle, and, on top of everything, in a red folder, separate from the rest, one printed email. 1. That was the email Ellie had found on her own, not through Russ, not through Lucy, not through Harriet, through pure, catastrophic, accidental coincidence. She had been in Bennett's home office 3 weeks ago, looking for the veterinary file for their dog, Winston, who was old and needed a new prescription. The printer had spit out a page as she walked past. Bennett had sent a print job from his phone and forgotten about it. Ellie had picked up the page to hand to him. She had not handed it to him. She had read it. Then she had read it again. Then she had sat down on the floor of Bennett's office and read it a third time. The email was dated 3 weeks before the divorce hearing. It was addressed to Sloan. It read, Sloan, once the divorce is finalized and the baby is in the custody arrangement I have structured, Eleanor will be out of the picture. The trust amendment will hold. You and I can finally be what we should have been from the beginning. I will marry you by spring. Be patient. Ellie had not cried. She had not screamed. She had stood up. She had walked to the printer. She had reprinted the email twice because she did not yet trust her own hands. She had put one copy in the red folder and one copy in a safety deposit box at Chase the next morning. Then she had gone home, cooked Bennett his favorite salmon dinner, asked him about his day, laughed at the story about his secretary's dog. That night, while he slept, she had lain next to him and counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. I deserved better than this, she had thought. It was not a question, and that was when she had known. Really known. For sure. She was not just going to divorce him. She was going to end him. Back in courtroom 3, Ellie placed her hand on the banker's box Maggie had wheeled in on a trolley. The boxes had grown teeth in the last 11 weeks. They sat on the petitioner's table, 3 of them, marked petitioners, exhibits 1 through 74. Ellie had not shown the email in the red folder to Bennett's lawyers. She was not required to. Under the discovery rules, Maggie had walked her through twice. The email was what the law called impeachment evidence. You could spring it on a witness who lied under oath without giving notice. Bennett did not know it existed. Sloan did not know it existed. It was a surprise. Judge Rowan McAllister entered the courtroom. Everyone rose. Ellie rose slowly, one hand on her belly. Be seated, the judge said. Good morning. We are here in the matter of Calloway versus Calloway. I see both parties are present with counsel. Mrs. Donnelly, you filed an amended petition yesterday. Mr. Whitfield, you have had 24 hours. Are we ready to proceed? We are, Your Honor, Maggie said. Graham Whitfield rose smoothly. Your Honor, we would like to note for the record our objection to the last-minute amendments. Noted, the judge said. Overruled. Sit down, Mr. Whitfield. Ellie exhaled, slowly. The baby kicked. Hard. Okay, baby, she thought. Here we go. Mrs. Donnelly, the judge said, call your first witness. Thank you, Your Honor. The petitioner calls Bennett Ashford Calloway III. There was a pause. Graham Whitfield whispered furiously to Bennett. Bennett shook his head once, stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked to the witness stand. He raised his right hand. He swore to tell the truth. He sat. He looked at Ellie. Ellie did not look back. Mr. Calloway, Maggie began, voice mild, almost pleasant. You are the CEO of Calloway Holdings, correct? Yes, Bennett said. And my client, Eleanor Whitmore Calloway, is your wife of 3 years and 11 months? Yes. She is currently 7.5 months pregnant with your child? Something flickered across Bennett's face. Yes, he said. Mr. Calloway, Maggie said. Do you know a woman named Sloan Hargrove? I do. She is the vice president of acquisitions at my company. How long has she held that role? Approximately 4 years. And before that? She was in my firm's associate program. Mr. Calloway, Maggie said, when did your romantic relationship with Miss Hargrove begin? The courtroom went still. Graham Whitfield shot up. Objection! Relevance! Your Honor, Maggie said, petitioner is seeking a finding of marital fault for purposes of equitable distribution and custody. The timeline of the adulterous relationship is directly material. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Calloway. Bennett straightened his tie. Once, twice. Miss Hargrove and I began a personal relationship approximately 1 year ago. 1 year ago, Maggie repeated. Yes. Mr. Calloway, I am going to show you what has been marked as Petitioner's Exhibit 4. Maggie lifted a document from the banker's box. She handed copies to the bailiff, the judge, and Whitfield. She carried one to the witness stand. Do you recognize this document, Mr. Calloway? Bennett's eyes moved down the page. His jaw tightened. It appears to be a hotel receipt from the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan, dated 4 years and 8 months ago, 2 months before you married my client, booked under the name Bennett Calloway, a king suite, room service for 2, a bottle of Dom Perignon, signed by you. I host business clients at the Pierre regularly. Do your business clients sign the guest registry with the name Sloane Hargrove? Silence. Mr. Calloway, please read the second line of the guest registry. He read nothing. His mouth did not move. Your Honor, Maggie said gently, may I read it into the record? You may, the judge said. Maggie read. Guest of B. Calloway, Miss Sloane Hargrove, anniversary stay. Champagne requested in advance. Ellie watched her husband's face. It was the face of a man watching a very expensive vase fall off a very tall shelf and realizing he was not going to catch it. Mr. Calloway, Maggie continued, I have 47 more such receipts, some as recent as 2 weeks ago. I will not ask you to review each of them. I will ask you one question. She paused. Is the testimony you gave this court 60 seconds ago, that your relationship with Miss Hargrove began 1 year ago, true or false? Bennett looked at Whitfield. Whitfield could not help him. I would like to amend my prior answer, Bennett said. Please do, Maggie said. The relationship is of longer duration than I initially stated. How much longer, Mr. Calloway? Approximately 5 years. In the gallery, Sloane Hargrove's cream blazer shifted. She was sitting up very straight. Ellie finally allowed herself to look at her. Sloane was not smiling anymore. I am not crazy, Ellie thought. I always knew. I just needed the paper to prove it to the rest of them. The first time Ellie thought she was losing the baby, it was a Tuesday at 3 in the morning. It was week 9 of the 11-week war. She was alone in the house. Bennett had moved into the Tribeca penthouse by then. To give her space, he had "stałeś," he had said, which was the phrase men used when what they meant was to live with the other woman without the optics. The house felt cavernous. The nursery, half-painted in a soft sage green, stood unfinished at the end of the hall. Ellie had woken up to cramping. Not Braxton Hicks, not the gentle tightening she had been warned about, real, sharp, low. She had lain very still in the dark for a long time. She had thought, if I do not move, if I do not get up, it will stop. It did not stop. At 3:15, she had called her mother. Mom, she said. Ellie, Clara Whitmore said. What is it? What is wrong? I think something is wrong. Where is Bennett? Mom. Okay, Clara said. Okay, baby. I am putting on my shoes. Call an ambulance. Now. I do not want an ambulance, Ellie said. I want to not be alone. Eleanor Jane Whitmore, her mother said. Call an ambulance. Mama is 2 hours away. Call now. Ellie called. She sat on the edge of the bathtub in her own bathroom, 7 months pregnant, wearing Bennett's old college sweatshirt because it still smelled faintly of him. She waited for the siren. The EMT was a woman, mid-40s, gray at the temples, kind eyes. Honey, the EMT said, is anyone coming to meet you at the hospital? My mom, Ellie said. That is it? My husband. He is away on business. The EMT said nothing. The EMT had heard this before. She helped Ellie into the back of the ambulance. "I am Patricia," she said. "Patricia Brennan. I have got you, sweetheart. Look at my face, not the ceiling. Breathe with me." Ellie looked at Patricia's face and breathed. "Patricia," Ellie said. "Yes, honey." "Will my baby be okay?" "I do not know that yet," Patricia said, "but I am going to tell you two things that are true. One, you are getting to the hospital faster than anyone else in Westchester County could get there tonight. Two, you are not alone. I am right here. Okay? Say it back. I am not alone. Again. I am not alone. Good girl." The baby was fine. The baby was fine. The obstetrician told her at 5 in the morning, looking at the monitor. The baby had a strong heartbeat. The baby was measuring right on track. What Ellie had experienced was advanced Braxton Hicks, common in the third trimester, common in women under extreme stress. "Are you under extreme stress, Mrs. Calloway?" the doctor asked. Ellie looked at the ceiling tiles. "Yes." "Is there someone we should call?" "My mother is on her way. A partner." "No," Ellie said. "There is no partner, just my mother." The obstetrician looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Calloway, I want to say something to you as a doctor, and I want you to hear me. Stress is not just emotional, it is physiological. Your body is carrying a child, and it is also carrying whatever is happening in your life. I do not know your situation. I am not asking, but I am telling you, whatever you are fighting, fight it differently. Your baby needs you to still be standing in 2 months." Ellie nodded. At 6 in the morning, her mother arrived. Clara Whitmore, nurse of 34 years, widow of 7. She walked into the hospital room, set down her overnight bag, climbed into the narrow bed next to her daughter. Held her, just held her, did not say anything for a long time. Then Clara said, very quietly, "He is going to lose, you know." "What?" "Bennett, he is going to lose this, because you are a Whitmore, and Whitmore women do not break. We bend, we bleed, we do not break." Ellie started to cry then. Not the polite crying of the last 2 months, real crying, the ugly kind. Clara stroked her hair. "Cry, baby," Clara said. "Cry it all out, because after today, we start building." But the next morning, Ellie was discharged. She sat in the passenger seat of her mother's old Subaru as Clara drove them home. The sky was gray. The trees were bare. It was mid-March. Ellie rested her head against the cold glass of the window. "Mom." "Yes, baby." "I am going to ruin him." "Okay. I mean it. I am not going to divorce him quietly. I am going to ruin him." "Ellie," Clara said. She did not take her eyes off the road. "You do not have to convince me. I raised you. I know what you are." "What am I?" "My daughter," Clara said simply. "That is what you are." Ellie turned to look at her mother. Clara had gray at her temples now, lines at the corners of her eyes, hands that had pressed compresses to strangers' foreheads for 34 years. "Mom, why did you never remarry after Dad died?" "Because your father was a good man," Clara said, "and I was not going to replace a good man with a pretty man. There is a difference. Is Bennett a pretty man?" "Ellie," Clara said, "Bennett is not even pretty. He is a well-tailored suit with a bank account inside. There is a difference." Ellie laughed, a real laugh, the first one in weeks. When they got home, Ellie walked straight to the kitchen island. She pulled a legal pad out of the drawer. She sat down. "Mom," she said, "I need to make a list. Will you sit with me while I make it?" "What kind of list?" "A list of everything I need to do in the next 60 days to make sure my daughter is safe." Clara sat down across from her. "Baby, Clara said. I will sit with you for as long as you need. And they sat there together, an old nurse and a pregnant daughter, making a list, line by line. By noon, the list had 27 items. By 3 o'clock, Ellie had called Maggie Donnelly and said one sentence. Maggie, she said, I am ready to go aggressive. 3 days after that, the first email from Theodore Bishop arrived. Assumed. Ellie sat at the kitchen island at midnight the following week, reorganizing the nursery drawers. She did not need to reorganize them. She had organized them last month. They were fine, but her hands needed something to do. She pulled every onesie out of the top drawer, refolded each one, smoothed them flat, stacked them in size order. Then she did the socks, then the tiny washcloths, then the little hats that fit in the palm of her hand. Grief, she was learning, lived in the hands. When you did not know how to feel, your hands knew. They folded, they smoothed, they arranged. They put things in order that had no order. She thought about every woman she knew who had been through something terrible. Her mother's friends, the woman at the dry cleaner whose son had died, the woman at the bakery whose husband had walked out after 28 years. She thought about all of them, and she realized that they all did this. Reorganized the pantry at midnight, rearranged the linen closet, sorted the mismatched Tupperware lids. Grief lived in the hands, and the hands, at least, knew what to do. The hardest part, Ellie thought, is admitting I knew all along. It was not a question, it was a statement. And it was true. The email arrived at 2 in the afternoon on a Friday. It came from an address Ellie did not recognize. The subject line read, I think we should talk. Theo Bishop. Ellie almost deleted it. Something made her open it instead. Eleanor, you do not know me. I am Bennett's half-brother. We have not spoken in 10 years for reasons I will not get into here. I heard about the divorce. I heard about the baby. I have information that I think you deserve to have. I do not want anything in return. I am not trying to insert myself in your life. I just think my niece or nephew deserves to grow up with at least one Calloway who is not a liar. If you want to meet, I am in Greenwich. Any coffee shop you pick. Theo. Ellie read the email 4 times. She forwarded it to Maggie. Maggie called her within the hour. Meet him, Maggie said. Bring a recorder. Maggie, he could be setting me up. He could be, Maggie said. We will know in 10 minutes. I have seen a lot of people in my career. Ellie, I will know. They met Theo Bishop at a coffee shop in Greenwich on a Saturday morning. He had brought his 8-year-old daughter, Delaney. She settled into a corner booth with a hot chocolate and a chapter book. Theo did not look like Bennett. He had the same jaw. That was all. Everything else, the warm brown eyes, the easy smile, the calloused hands of a man who did not spend his life in conference rooms, was his own. Thanks for coming, he said. I know this is weird. It is weird, Ellie said. I will make it fast, Theo said. My mother was Preston Calloway's first wife. He left her when I was 4 for Vivian. There was a settlement. There was also an agreement that I would never inherit Vivian's condition for the marriage. Okay. My mother died 2 years ago. In her papers, I found something. Preston, my father, our father, I guess, made me a quiet beneficiary of a trust when I was a baby. It was a guilt thing. He never told Vivian. He never told Bennett. He never told me. He just funded it every year and let it grow. Ellie looked at Maggie. Maggie looked very alert. How much? Maggie said. A lot. Mr. Bishop, Maggie said. How much? About $140 million, as of last year's statement. Ellie set down her coffee cup. I did not want it at first, Theo continued. I have my own life. I am a high school history teacher. Delaney and I are fine. But when I heard about the baby, about Bennett having a baby, I started looking into the trust more carefully, and what I found was that Bennett and my father have been using language in the main Callaway Trust for the last 3 years to quietly rewrite the inheritance structure in Bennett's favor against any other heirs, including my niece or nephew. Ellie felt the blood leave her face. Explain. Bennett amended the primary trust 18 months ago. The amendment stipulates that any child born of the marriage of Bennett Callaway and Eleanor Whitmore is entitled to zero inheritance from the Callaway estate in the event of dissolution of marriage. He did this 6 months after you started trying for a baby. Yes. He planned this. Eleanor, Theo said. He planned all of it. The prenup, the trust amendment, the offshore accounts. I do not know what else he did, but I can tell you this. I have the documents. I have a copy of the amendment. And because I am a beneficiary of the original pre-amendment trust, which my father kept hidden from everyone, I have legal standing to contest it. Maggie Donnelly laughed out loud, a single, sharp, delighted laugh. Mr. Bishop, Theo. Theo! Have you eaten breakfast? Not yet. Then let me buy you the most expensive pancakes in Connecticut, because I think you just won my client her case. After breakfast, while Delaney was occupied with an extra pancake and a book about horses, Theo asked Ellie a question. Can I ask you something personal? Yes. Are you okay? Ellie was quiet for a moment. No, she said. But I will be. That is a good answer. Why? Because when people say I am fine, I know they are lying. When people say no, but I will be, I know they are going to make it. Ellie looked down at her tea. Theo, why are you helping me? A few reasons, he said. The honest one is that my brother is a cruel man. He was cruel as a kid. He was cruel as a teenager. He was cruel as an adult. The last time I saw him, 10 years ago, I was at my mother's house the week she was diagnosed with cancer. Bennett came to see her, not because he cared about her, but because our father had mentioned that she had some original artwork from her first marriage that might have value. He came to see the paintings, not his mother's almost stepmother, her paintings. Theo shook his head. He asked her how much she wanted for them, while she was in a wheelchair. He was 24. He knew better. Ellie closed her eyes. I told him to leave, Theo continued. I told him to leave and to never contact us again. He left. He never contacted us. Not when she died, not when I had Delaney, not when my wife passed last year. Ellie opened her eyes. Theo, your wife. 2 years ago, he said. Car accident. Nothing dramatic. She was picking up milk. I am so sorry. Thank you, Theo said. I am telling you this because I want you to know. When I say I am doing this for my niece, for your daughter, I mean it. I know what it is to raise a child alone. I know what it is to be the parent who has to be everything. I do not want your little girl to look up at the Callaway name someday and think there is only one version of it. There is another version. Me, Delaney, and if you will let us, your daughter. Ellie felt her throat close. Theo, are you asking? I'm not asking anything yet, Theo said. I am telling you, when this is over, when you are out, if you ever want Delaney and me to know your little girl, she will have a cousin who will love her, and an uncle who will show up, every time. Ellie looked at Delaney, across the diner. Hot chocolate mustache, book about horses, and she thought about Bennett, who had never once put his hand on her belly without checking his watch. Theo, she said, thank you. For what? For showing up? For being someone I did not know was possible. Theo shook his head. Eleanor, he said, you are going to look back at this year, in 10 years, and you are going to understand that the worst thing in your life was also the beginning of the best. It does not feel like that now. I know. It did not feel like that for me when I lost my wife, but it is true. How long? How long what? How long until it feels true? Theo smiled, softly. For me, he said, 2 years and 3 months. Delaney is the one who taught me. Kids have no patience for grief. They just keep needing you to make breakfast. And one day you are making breakfast, and you realize you are not faking it anymore. That is when you know. Ellie put her hand on her belly. Pancakes, she whispered. I will have to learn to make pancakes. I make a good pancake, Theo said. Ellie laughed. A small laugh, but a real one. Back in courtroom 3, Maggie Donnelly turned to the gallery. Your Honor, petitioner calls Miss Sloane Hargrove. Sloane had clearly expected this. She had been subpoenaed. She rose slowly from the first row of the gallery, walked past Bennett without looking at him, took the stand. She wore cream. She wore pearls. She wore the expression of a woman who had spent the morning practicing not looking guilty. Miss Hargrove, Maggie began, are you currently in a romantic relationship with Bennett Calloway? Yes. How long have you been in a romantic relationship with Bennett Calloway? Sloane hesitated. Approximately 5 years. Thank you for your honesty, Miss Hargrove. Were you a guest at the wedding of Bennett Calloway and my client? Yes. In what capacity? I was the maid of honor. Miss Hargrove. During the period in which you were sleeping with my client's then fiancé, did my client ever confide in you about her relationship with Mr. Calloway? Sloane's lips parted. Objection, Whitfield said. Relevance. Overruled. Answer, please. She, Sloane said. Yes, she did. Miss Hargrove, did my client confide in you about fertility struggles she and Mr. Calloway experienced? Yes. Did you attend IVF appointments with her? I attended one. You attended one. Were you aware, when you attended that IVF appointment, that you were at that time in a sexual relationship with her husband? Silence. Miss Hargrove. Yes. Yes, you were aware. Yes. Ellie felt the room tilt. Maggie had warned her this was coming. Maggie had prepped her for this moment. Ellie had still not quite believed it could be said out loud. In a courtroom. On the record. But it could. And it had been. I am not crazy, she thought. I know what I saw. Miss Hargrove, Maggie said. One more question. Maggie reached into the red folder. Ellie held her breath. Miss Hargrove, I am handing you what has been marked Petitioner's Exhibit 17. Do you recognize it? Sloane looked down. The blood drained from her face in a way Ellie had only ever read about in novels. Actual, visible, draining. The cream of her blazer suddenly looked garish against her skin. Where did you get this? Sloane whispered. Miss Hargrove, please identify the document. It is. Miss Hargrove, it is an email. From whom to whom? From Bennett. To me. The date, Miss Hargrove. 3 weeks ago. Please read the highlighted portion into the record. Sloane's hands were shaking. I cannot. You can, Maggie said. You must. Please read. Sloane's voice cracked. She read. Sloane, once the divorce is finalized and the baby is in the custody arrangement I have structured, Eleanor will be out of the picture. The trust amendment will hold. You and I can finally be what we should have been from the beginning. I will marry you by spring. Be patient. Be. The courtroom was utterly silent. Sloane looked up, not at Maggie, at Bennett. Bennett was staring at the table in front of him. He did not meet her eyes. Bennett, Sloane said, softly. He did not answer. Bennett, is that why? Is that why you told me to sit in the gallery today? Not at the table, the gallery. He did not answer. You were going to? You were going to do it again. Were you not? Miss Hargrove, the judge said gently. Are you able to continue? Sloane stood up. She was not asked to stand. She stood up anyway. I am sorry, Your Honor. I need to leave. Miss Hargrove, you are under subpoena. I am sorry. I... She stepped down from the witness stand. She walked, not to the gallery, but to the aisle, and then down the aisle. Her heels clicked faster and faster on the marble. She pushed open the heavy oak door of courtroom 3. The door swung, closed, opened again as she pushed through it. From the hallway, through the closing door, Ellie heard it. A sob, raw, jagged. Not the crying of a woman who had lost a lover. The crying of a woman who had just understood, for the first time in 5 years, that she had never been the exception. She had always been the next Eleanor. The door closed. Silence. Bennett, white-faced, stared at his hands. Ellie placed her own hand on her belly. The baby was still, listening. Damned. Judge Rowan McAllister called a 15-minute recess. Ellie, Maggie, and Clara Whitmore, who had slipped into the gallery 20 minutes earlier, retreated to a small conference room down the hall. Ellie sat down in a chair and did not move for a full minute. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply sat. Baby, her mother said. Mom, breathe. Mom, I could hear her crying. I know. I thought I would feel victorious. I do not feel victorious. I feel sad. Yes. Clara came and sat next to her. She put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Baby, Clara said, that is because you are a good woman. A good woman can take a bad man to court and still feel sad about the woman who slept with him. That is not weakness. That is the thing that makes you different from him. Remember that. Ellie put her face in her hands. Mom. Yeah. I do not want to be him. I do not want to become him. You are not, Clara said. You will not. A woman who is worried about becoming cruel is not becoming cruel. She is becoming strong. There is a difference. Ellie cried then. Just for a minute. Just quietly. Not for Bennett. Not for Sloane. Not even for herself. For the version of herself who had spent 5 years believing Sloane's laugh at the rehearsal dinner. That version of her was gone now. And that version, Ellie realized, needed to be mourned too. Maggie handed her a glass of water. Eleanor, I want you to listen to me. The worst part is over. Sloane is gone. Bennett is on the ropes. We still have to call one more witness, and then the judge will rule. I need you with me for 90 more minutes. Can you give me 90 more minutes? Ellie looked up. Yes. Good girl. The bailiff knocked on the door. Counselor, judge is back on the bench. 2 minutes. Eleanor, Maggie said. Stand up, walk with me. Chin up. This is the last mile. Ellie stood up. She touched her hospital bracelet. 3 times. She touched her belly. 3 times. Starting over feels impossible, she thought. But staying feels worse. It was not a question. And she walked back into courtroom 3. Your Honor, Maggie said. Petitioner calls Preston Calloway. Across the aisle, Bennett's head snapped up. Objection, Graham Whitfield was on his feet. Preston Calloway was not on the witness list, Your Honor. This is... He was added yesterday, Counselor, Maggie said mildly. With the amended filing you objected to, which His Honor approved. Overruled. Sit down, Mr. Whitfield. Preston Calloway entered the courtroom from the rear. He was 66, silver-haired, tall in the way Bennett was tall. He walked with the slight stiffness of a man who had golfed his way through 3 decades and was now paying for it. He did not look at his son. He walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Ellie had never thought her father-in-law would be on her side. He was not. Not exactly. What he was on the side of was the Calloway name, and by extension, the unborn grandchild currently pressing a small foot into Ellie's ribcage. And Theodore Bishop had spent the last 3 weeks, quietly, carefully, over 4-hour dinners in Greenwich, convincing his father of something that Ellie herself would not fully understand until she heard it said aloud. "Mr. Calloway," Maggie began, "you are the founder of Calloway Holdings and the patriarch of the Calloway Family Trust." "I am." "Did your son, Bennett Calloway, amend the primary family trust 18 months ago to exclude any child born of his marriage to my client?" Preston's jaw worked. "He did." "Did you know about this amendment at the time it was made?" "I did not. I learned of it 6 weeks ago." "From whom did you learn of it?" "My son, Theodore Bishop." "Your estranged son." "My son," Preston said. Maggie let that sit. "Mr. Calloway," Maggie said, "since learning of the amendment, what action have you taken?" "I have revoked it." "You have revoked it?" "Yes. As the grantor of the trust, I retain unilateral revocation authority. I executed the revocation 11 days ago. The revocation has been filed with the trustees. The original inheritance structure, which guarantees an equal share to all grandchildren of the Calloway line, is restored. This includes my son Bennett's unborn child." The courtroom had gone very quiet again. Bennett's hands were flat on the table in front of him. They were shaking. "Mr. Calloway," Maggie said, "one final question. Do you have any statement you wish to make regarding your son's conduct in this matter?" Preston Calloway looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Ellie. "Eleanor," he said, "I did not know you very well. I regret that now. Vivian and I kept our distance from your marriage because we thought our son had chosen a simple woman. We were wrong. Our son chose a woman of extraordinary character. The fault in this marriage was not yours. It was ours, for raising him, and his. For being the man we raised. I am sorry. I will not make excuses." Ellie's throat closed. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway," Maggie said gently. "No further questions?" Preston stepped down. As he passed Ellie's table, he paused. He placed one hand, briefly, on the banker's box in front of her. "Good girl," he said, very quietly. "Good mother." And then he kept walking. The judge called a brief recess before closing arguments. Ellie sat in the small conference room again. Her mother was there. Maggie was there. Harriet Coyle had also somehow found her way to the courthouse and was sitting quietly in the corner, knitting. Ellie looked at Harriet. "Harriet, you came." "Of course I came," Harriet said. "I was not going to miss this." Ellie laughed, a small, surprised laugh. "Mrs. Calloway," Harriet said. "Harriet, please, Eleanor." "Eleanor, I will tell you something. I spent 31 years in that house. I watched 3 generations of Calloway men do terrible things. I watched the women put up with it, smile through it, pour drinks through it. I made a decision, the first time I held my own granddaughter, that if I ever got the chance to help one of those Calloway women get free, I was going to take it. You gave me that chance. Thank you." Ellie looked at her. "Harriet, I should be thanking you." "No, I should be thanking you. You are brave enough to let me help. A lot of women are not." Clara reached across the table and took Harriet's hand. "Harriet," Clara said, "whatever you need for the rest of your life, you call us. I mean it." Harriet smiled. "Mrs. Whitmore, I raised 4 children on a housekeeper's salary. What I need most is for this one." She nodded at Ellie. "To have a boring, dull, happy life. That is what I need. Boredom for Eleanor. That is my retirement gift." They all laughed. A small, exhausted, grateful laugh. The door opened. The bailiff said, "Counselor, the judge is ready." Maggie stood. She put her hand on Ellie's shoulder. Eleanor, one more thing. I want you to remember this for the rest of your life. Some women spend their whole lives waiting for someone to give them permission to leave. You did not wait. You gave yourself permission. That is the bravest thing I have ever seen a client do. Now come on, let us go collect your freedom. Ellie stood. She straightened her dress over her belly. She picked up her tote. She walked out into the hallway. At the end of the hallway, through a window, she could see the afternoon light coming in gold through the tall windows of the courthouse. She had walked into this building at 9 in the morning, terrified, carrying a manila envelope. She was going to walk out of it, 7 hours later, carrying her own life. She stopped apologizing, Ellie thought, for everything, all at once. It was not a question. Closing arguments took 40 minutes. Graham Whitfield went first. His argument was technical. It was about the admissibility of evidence, about the limits of marital fault doctrine, about the discretion of the court. It was a lawyer's argument. It had nothing in it for the human beings in the room. Maggie Donnelly went second. She stood up. She walked to the center of the courtroom. She did not use notes. She spoke for 11 minutes. She talked about Ellie, about 2 years of trying to conceive, about a woman who had carried a baby, a marriage, a household, and a secret, all at the same time, and who had not broken. She talked about Bennett, about the pattern, about the math, about the cruelty of amending a trust to disinherit a child 6 months before that child was conceived. She talked about Sloane, briefly, not unkindly. She talked about Preston, about Theo, about Harriet. She said their names into the record. Then she said one sentence. Your Honor, my client asked me once, in my office, if staying silent for peace had cost her voice. I told her no. I told her what she was about to do in this courtroom would give her voice back. I was wrong, because the truth, Your Honor, is that she never lost her voice, not for 1 minute. She just needed a room where people would finally listen. This is that room. Thank you. She sat down. Judge Rowan McAllister called a 10-minute recess to deliberate. Ellie sat very still. Clara sat next to her, held her hand. Harriet, from the gallery, gave her a small nod. Across the aisle, Bennett did not look at her. 10 minutes passed, 12 minutes passed, 15. The bailiff's door opened. Judge McAllister returned to the bench. Everyone rose. Ellie rose slowly, one hand on her belly. Be seated, the judge said. I have reached a decision. I want to note for the record that I am grateful to both counsel for the thoroughness of their arguments. And I want to note for the record that the conduct documented in this case is among the most egregious I have seen in 31 years on the bench. He paused. He looked at Bennett. Mr. Calloway, please stand. Bennett stood. The court finds, by a preponderance of the evidence, that you engaged in gross financial misconduct during the marriage, including the establishment of undisclosed offshore accounts, unauthorized transfers of marital assets, and fraudulent concealment of income. You further engaged in a pattern of deception extending before and throughout the marriage, including a documented 5-year adulterous relationship. The court further finds that you attempted the fraudulent disinheritance of an unborn child, your own unborn child, through deliberate manipulation of the Calloway Family Trust. Bennett did not move. The court finds for the petitioner on all counts. Maggie squeezed Ellie's hand under the table. The marital estate shall be divided 70-30 in favor of the petitioner. Primary physical and legal custody of the minor child, upon birth, is awarded to the petitioner. Supervised visitation only for the respondent, to be reviewed in 24 months. Spousal and child support shall be calculated at the maximum statutory rate. The court further finds that respondent's conduct toward petitioner during her pregnancy constitutes an aggravating factor warranting a financial penalty of an additional 10% of the marital estate. 80-20. Final. All prior trust amendments executed by the respondent relating to the petitioner's unborn child are declared void. The judge paused. Mr. Calloway, before I conclude, I want to say something to you that is not part of this ruling. It is a comment from the bench. You will have many opportunities in the coming years to be a father, in some limited fashion, to your daughter. I suggest, strongly, that you use them. I have presided over many divorces in this courtroom. The men who do not make amends to their children, in my experience, die alone. I am telling you this as a favor, not as a judge, as a man who has watched many other men fail. Do not fail. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Ellie stood. She did not cry. She stood slowly, with both hands on her belly. She looked at the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. Then she walked out of courtroom 3. Bennett did not look at her. Bennett did not look at anyone. He sat at the table with his lawyer, and he stared straight ahead, and in that moment, Ellie understood something her mother had said years ago and that she had not, until now, believed. Losing him is gaining you, Clara had said. It just takes a while to feel it. She walked past him. He did not turn his head. She pushed open the oak doors of courtroom 3. Her mother took her arm on one side. Maggie took her arm on the other. Harriet followed behind them. The 3 women and Harriet walking out of the courtroom together. At the end of the corridor stood Theo Bishop and his daughter, Delaney. Delaney held a small white bouquet. "We were not sure if it was appropriate," Theo said, scratching the back of his neck. Delaney insisted. Delaney held the flowers up. "They are for the baby," she said. "I am going to be her cousin, my dad says. Is that okay?" Ellie lowered herself carefully and took the flowers. "That," she said, "is very okay." Delaney smiled. She had her father's smile. Ellie stood up and looked at Theo. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Theo said. "I needed to do it too, for me." Theo. "Yeah. The baby is a girl, my mom says. Moms always know. Yeah." Ellie looked down the long marble corridor toward the doors of the courthouse. Afternoon light was coming in gold through the glass. She took a breath. It went all the way to the bottom of her lungs for the first time in 11 weeks. Then she walked toward the light. Her mother walked with her. Maggie walked with her. Harriet walked with her. Theo and Delaney walked with her. In the parking garage, Ellie stopped by her car. She put her hand on the door handle. This time, she opened it. 6 months later, Ellie stood in the nursery of a small, bright apartment on the Upper West Side. She was folding tiny cotton onesies into a dresser drawer. The apartment was not huge, 2 bedrooms, a living room with a window that faced east, so Charlotte woke up every morning with sun on her face. The rent was paid for the next 10 years in a lump sum, per the divorce settlement. Ellie had deliberately chosen something modest. The rest of the money was in a trust for Charlotte. Theo had helped her structure it. Theo, it turned out, was very good at the things Bennett had always pretended to be good at. Charlotte slept in the crib by the window. She was 3 months old. She had Ellie's chin and her grandmother Clara's eyebrows. As far as Ellie could tell, nothing visible of Bennett at all, which was a small mercy Ellie tried not to pray too loudly about. The mobile over the crib turned slowly in the breeze from the open window. Little felt stars. Clara had sewn them herself. Ellie folded another onesie, smoothed it flat, 3 times. Her phone buzzed. "Theo, Delaney wants to know if she can come meet the baby this weekend. She has opinions about names for her stuffed animals and needs a second. Ellie, tell her Saturday. I will make grilled cheese. Theo. She says yes to grilled cheese. I say yes to coffee afterward, if that is allowed. Ellie looked at the text for a long moment. She typed, "Coffee is allowed." She put the phone down. She had not dated since the divorce. She was not sure she would. She had told Maggie Donnelly during their final meeting 6 months ago that she thought she would be alone for a long time. Maggie had laughed and said, "Sweetheart, that is not alone. That is free. There is a difference." Ellie had not, at the time, understood the difference. She understood it now. She finished folding the onesies. She closed the drawer. She walked to the small closet by the nursery door. Inside the closet, on the top shelf, was a cardboard box. The box was labeled, in Ellie's handwriting, with one word, "Donate." Inside the box was her wedding dress. She had not been able to throw it away. She had not been able to keep it. It had sat in the closet of her mother's house for 3 months. Then Clara had shipped it to her. Today Ellie pulled it down. She laid it on the guest bed. She smoothed it flat. Once, twice, 3 times. She folded the skirt over the bodice. Smoothed it flat. 3 times. She folded the sleeves inward. Smoothed it flat. 3 times. She put the folded dress back in the box. She wrote the name of a women's shelter on top of the box, in marker. A shelter in the Bronx. A shelter for women fleeing abusive marriages, who might need a wedding dress someday, for a court appearance, or a job interview, or a moment that demanded a soft, beautiful, ivory thing that did not carry its old meaning anymore. She closed the box. She carried it to the front door. She set it down. Then she walked to the window. Charlotte stirred in the crib, opened one eye, looked at her mother. "Hi," Ellie whispered. Charlotte made a small sound, not a cry, an acknowledgement. Ellie lifted her out of the crib and carried her to the window. The afternoon sun was coming in, gold and warm. On the street below, a woman pushed a stroller. A man walked a large, undignified dog. A kid on a skateboard bombed down the sidewalk. Life, in all its ordinary traffic. "Charlotte," Ellie said softly. Charlotte blinked at her. "I want to tell you something, and I am going to tell you again when you are older, but I want to say it now, while you are small, because I want you to hear it in the voice I have today. Okay, Bug." Charlotte blinked again. The prison door was unlocked the whole time. That is what I learned. That is the thing I want you to know. People will try to make you small. Sometimes it will be people who love you. Sometimes it will be people who just look like they love you. It will feel, for a long time, like you cannot leave, like you cannot open the door. You can. You always can. That is the thing they do not want you to know. You always can. Charlotte made another small sound. "I thought love meant making myself smaller," Ellie said. "It turns out love means refusing to disappear." Charlotte yawned. Ellie laughed. Actually laughed. A real one. She carried her daughter to the rocking chair by the window and sat down. She rocked slowly, while the afternoon light moved across the nursery floor. Outside, a man, on the corner, was selling flowers from a bucket. In the kitchen, the kettle she had put on 10 minutes ago was just beginning to whistle. On the counter was an unopened letter from her mother. On the fridge was a child's drawing from Delaney of 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one medium, one very small. The very small one was labeled Charlotte in big crayon letters. On her phone was a text from Theo she had not yet answered. On her belly, now her own belly again, not a borrowed landscape, was the soft weight of her sleeping child. Ellie thought about Sloane, briefly, the way she sometimes did. She had heard, through a friend of a friend, that Sloane had left Callaway Holdings, had left New York, had moved to Chicago, and started over, was working at a smaller firm, was, according to the mutual friend, doing the work, which was the phrase people used when they meant therapy. Ellie did not wish her ill. She did not wish her well either. She simply, finally, did not wish her anything. Sloane was a door Ellie had closed. Some doors you closed and walked past every day. Some doors you closed and forgot. Sloane was becoming the second kind. She thought about Bennett. He was not in Charlotte's life. He had taken the initial supervised visits, grudgingly, and then, 3 months in, had simply stopped showing up. His attorney had sent a letter. Mr. Calloway feels that given the child's age, visitation is not currently productive. Ellie had read the letter once, filed it, moved on. She did not know if he would ever come back. She knew. This was the harder thing, the thing it had taken her 6 months to sit with. She no longer needed him to. She rocked Charlotte, slowly. The kettle whistled. Ellie stood up, walked to the kitchen, turned off the burner, came back to the rocking chair, sat down again, kept rocking. She thought about Preston Calloway. He had called her twice in the last 6 months. Both times he had asked awkwardly if he could meet his granddaughter. Ellie had said yes. Both visits had been short. Preston had held Charlotte for 10 minutes each time and cried once, quietly, when he thought no one was looking. She thought about Theodore Bishop. She thought about the coffee she had agreed to. She was not in a hurry. She was not running from anything. She was not running toward anything. She was sitting in a rocking chair, in her own apartment, holding her own daughter. This, Ellie thought, was what after looked like. It looked like a small apartment. It looked like a kettle. It looked like a drawing on a fridge and a text she would answer in a minute. Not now. It looked like her daughter breathing against her collarbone. It did not look like revenge. It looked like a life. Her life. At last. At 6 in the evening, there was a soft knock at the door. Ellie carried Charlotte to the door. She looked through the peephole. Her mother, Harriet Coyle, Maggie Donnelly. Ellie laughed out loud. She opened the door. "What are you three doing?" "We brought dinner," Clara said. Harriet cooked. Maggie drove. I supervised.
Value that.
"Maggie is a terrible driver," Harriet said. "I am an excellent driver," Maggie said. "She hit a curb on 96th Street, Clara said. "Once," Maggie said. They came into the apartment. They took off their coats. Harriet unpacked 3 containers of lasagna and a salad. Clara unpacked a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider. Maggie unpacked a bakery box. "What is in the box?" Ellie asked. "Cheesecake," Maggie said. "From that place on 72nd. The one you said you were craving in month 8. "Maggie, I mentioned that 6 months ago." "I remembered," Maggie said. Ellie looked at her. "Maggie, do not get soft on me, Whitmore. I am still your lawyer. We are still billing this visit. You are not billing this visit. I am billing this visit." Harriet laughed. Clara laughed. Ellie laughed. They sat around the small kitchen table. Charlotte slept in her bassinet by the window. Outside, the city was turning its lights on, one window at a time, the way cities do in March. They ate lasagna. They talked about small things. Harriet's grandson's school play. Clara's neighbor's new puppy. Maggie's upcoming vacation to Ireland, her first in 12 years. Nobody mentioned Bennett. Nobody mentioned Sloane. Nobody needed to. After dinner, Ellie stood up to clear the plates. Clara stood up to help. "Mom, sit down. You drove 2 hours." "I am fine, baby." "Mom, please, let me do something for you for once." Clara sat down. Ellie cleared the plates, washed them slowly, put them in the drying rack. She looked out the window over the sink, at the lit-up windows of the building across the street, at the people inside them, making dinner, watching television, being families. She thought about the woman she had been 1 year ago, sitting at a different kitchen island, in a different house, waiting for a man who would not come home. She thought about the woman she was now. standing at her own sink, washing her own dishes, with her own mother at her own kitchen table, and her own daughter sleeping in her own bassinet. I am not crazy, she thought. I know what I saw. I know what I did. I know what I built. And this time, the statement was not a defense. It was a declaration. Later, after her mother and Harriet and Maggie had left, after Ellie had nursed Charlotte and put her down for the night, she stood in the doorway of the nursery and watched her daughter sleep. Charlotte's tiny chest rose and fell, tiny fingers curled into tiny fists, tiny mouth open just slightly. The universal position of every baby who had ever slept well. Ellie stood there for a long time. She thought about what she would tell Charlotte someday, when Charlotte was old enough to ask. She would tell her the true parts. She would tell her that her mother had been pregnant, and alone, and afraid, and that her mother had walked into a courthouse anyway, carrying a box. She would tell her that sometimes the bravest thing a woman does is not leave. It is decide to leave. She would tell her that decision is a door you open by yourself, and once it is open, you cannot close it again. She would tell her that her grandmother Clara had said, "Whitmore women do not break," and that it had turned out to be true. She would tell her about Harriet, who had held her tongue for 31 years and then spoken. She would tell her about Maggie, who had believed her. She would tell her about Uncle Theo, who had shown up when no one asked him to. She would tell her about Preston, who had made amends the only way a man like him knew how. She would tell her that love is not a trap, that love is a door, and a door that will not open when you need it to is not love. It is just a wall with better marketing. She would tell her one more thing. She would tell her that on the afternoon of her divorce hearing, her mother had walked out of a courthouse with the sun on her face, and that she had not, in that moment, felt triumphant or vindictive, or even particularly brave. She had felt, simply, finally, awake. Awake for the first time in 4 years. Awake the way a person wakes up in their own bed, in their own room, in their own life. And she would tell Charlotte that this feeling, this quiet, sunlit, ordinary feeling of being awake in your own life, was the thing worth fighting for. Not revenge, not winning, not even justice exactly. Just this. A small apartment, a kettle, a drawing on a fridge, a daughter breathing in the next room, a text from a kind man that she would answer in the morning, the sound of the city turning its lights on, the prison door unlocked, and a woman, finally, walking through it. Ellie turned off the nursery light. She closed the door halfway, the way Charlotte liked it. She walked into her own bedroom, her own bed, her own pillows, her own quiet. She picked up her phone. She looked at Theo's last text. She typed coffee, Saturday. After Delaney's grilled cheese, there's a place on 86th Street that has the best lavender lattes. I have been waiting to take someone there. She did not hit send right away. She looked at the message for a minute, then she added one more line. I am glad you found me, Theo. Really? She hit send. She put the phone down. She pulled the covers up to her chin. Outside, somewhere in the city, a kettle whistled in someone else's kitchen. A baby cried and was comforted. A marriage ended. A friendship began. In her own bedroom, on her own pillow, in her own life, Eleanor Whitmore closed her eyes. And for the first time in 11 months, she slept, all the way through, until morning. Editorial disclaimer. This content was researched, written, and handcrafted by our team. Designed to bring meaning, wisdom, and one small lesson to every listener. Names, characters, and events in this story are a creative dramatization inspired by the quiet, ordinary courage of women everywhere. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. We made this for you.